Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is the Michael Miller trademark training materials video out to you because you're watching. Thank you. And meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, my core new core, and anyone interested in surviving as a Pilates instructor. And the conversation has been interesting lately because the more I see the proliferation of the expression of Pilates out on social media and the breadth of its expression, the 10,000 things, meaning the 10,000 different views of the ways people look at Pilates, whether you're an individual or a group, it's just a view. And MMP is just a view of Joe's original work, his book. Mostly is all you need, and whatever film and pictures he originally took are reinforcement to what you find in the book. What you find in the book are three things. You find the definition, the promise, and the sequence. Okay? So we're talking about MMP, and MMP is built on there being an ideal within Joe's original work, pretty much based on those three things. Joe's definition of his method is contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. In the very next paragraph, he starts off with contrology develops the body uniformly, ... But that's as much of what I need to know right there. And then the third part, of course, is the sequence. And maybe you can get, well, I don't know. The work is there, and the point is to perceive the idea within the original work. And to know that that's what MMP is talking about when you refer to it. I feel a motivation to expand just a little bit because I have a couple of new viewers. Welcome. So whenever I get lost or wonder where to start in my effort to be a Pilates instructor, especially if I'm teaching instead of instructing, a great focus or the beginning of the string for me, here's a string, and the beginning of that string is here. The beginning of the string for me is the man, Joseph Pilates, and the key characteristic of that man, from all of the people that I've talked to that knew him, described him as a survivor. Joe was a survivor. And so from there I take that to be his training is survival training. And the jungle that we're trying to survive in is, of course, gravity. Which then takes me into the mantra of the gravity forces the issue of alignment. Alignment is sensational via tension between 2 points to trigger uniform usage. Now, of course, I like to say, instead of uniform usage, I like to compare it to fluorescence, but don't let the comparison distract you from the triggering that you're doing from the tension between 2 points is the uniform engagement of musculature. Okay? And the reason we like that is because Joe's promise, you can point to a wedding ring as promise. I don't have one, but it's a good physical symbol that you can point to about making a promise. And that the promise that Joe makes to me in his words is that contrology develops the body uniformly. Okay? And so, however you get to the result, that's fulfilling Joe's promise. And there are some who might approach it with this part or these pieces on this day and that day and this day, and some other pieces on this day and this day and that day. But the mainstream of the old guard, I'm not sure what the major stream is anymore, would acknowledge that Pilates is meant to be a whole body engagement, right? And it needs to be a whole body engagement because Joe promises contrology develops the body uniformly. And when you understand this, when you're connected to Joe's words right out of his book, and to why you're after uniform engagement in order to produce uniform development, I feel I'm standing on pretty solid ground where I'm coming from in terms of what I'm about and what I'm after when I'm working with a student or a class. So let's save the definition for last and go on to the sequence. And the definition of the ideal within Joe's original work, which Joe didn't define. This is Michael Miller looking at the original work and saying, I see something ideal in there, and the best way that I can define it, so the definition of the ideal within the original work is uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. So I know it's a mouthful of a definition, but if you divide it into 3 parts and do the beginning part, the second part, and then end on the middle part, it helps when you describe it. And again, like we've been talking about, when you act in not on my behalf, well, as an instructor of mine, I encourage you to let your student know that you have a simple message that takes a while, it takes a few times to hear to sink in, or to see go by, like in watching a carousel, right? And so let a person know that it's a consistent message that you won't absorb all at once. There's too much detail, and there's too much going on. There's too much time happening, right? So the more you hear the idea, or the more you listen to this part of this tape, uniform eccentric loading. Why does the word uniform have to be in the definition? If you're seeking to make a definition of the ideal that you perceive within the original work. Well, uniform has to be there because we just got done saying that to get uniform development, to fulfill the promise, takes uniform engagement. And so based on that, uniform is important to be part of what makes up the ideal. Okay. Now this tricky word eccentric, where I've got 2 fingers and I'm pointing, and starting at my knuckles and going out from there, going away from that point in the middle. Eccentric, out away from center. It's just too tempting to dive too deep into too much without just taking a layer off at a time. And so let's move on to the word loading. And loading, if you look at the sequence of the mat, is apparent by how the exercises, in the order of the exercises, the body becomes heavier and heavier. There's more loading involved, right? So the aspect of controlling more weight further away from center and doing it uniformly is a key part of what Pilates is all about, based on what you see in the original work. And again, if you then look at that pattern of the sequence, you see the loading and other things being progressive in nature, meaning it happens in stages. It just doesn't happen all at once. And that the stages are happening or expressing themselves through patterns of movement in this plane of space that divides us into, I don't want to use fancy words, just in this plane that divides us in two, there's flexion and extension within that plane. And then if we divide another plane 90 degrees, like that, 90 degrees from the one we're in, this plane, that pretty much takes up all of the idealized space we consider in a 3D world. Okay? And in that world, it's side bending as a pattern of movement. And it's progressive in the pattern because you go from this pattern, which is primary. All of these senses and these are geared toward in front of us. Because to survive, we have to get to the food first and mate first before anybody else gets a chance. It's human nature. It's the way we evolved. And that's because of the physics that we're in. And the ability to move requires us to be able to move adroitly. And that generally boils down to the primary process of forward. And that the lateral, I'm trying to go sideways here, the lateral plane, the control of this plane, like a tightrope walker that holds a long bar out, all of that weight out at distance gives control of the lateral plane so that one can make better control of this plane. And then rotation comes, exploring the space in between those planes, and then the sophistication of rotation turns into torsion, and that's the progressive pattern of movement that we see in the original work that has to be part of any expression of an ideal within the original work, my opinion. And so that's part 2 of the 3. There was progressive pattern, no, there was uniform eccentric loading and progressive patterns of movement, and the 2 key words that connects those 2 parts of the definition is flowing through. See, flowing through. Meaning that there has to be flow. And for one reason, there may be others I'm not thinking of, but the primary one that you have to, well, there's always the best first reason, and that's because that's the way Joe does it. Joe's filming of his mat work, there's flow from one exercise to the next. Not just in the way the exercises progress in loading or in pattern, but also through time. Right? So, you have to press the flow to find the fusion. And that takes us to definition. Okay? This has been an interesting trip around the merry-go-round because I wasn't expecting to make it, but I hope I have set an example of how when you know this, the key few things, the three things that make up the ideal, right? You got the idea memorized, uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement, of course. And you have Joe's definition memorized, which is what we're on now, which is contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. And in the world of MMP, you know, Michael Miller-Pilates looks at the student, the human being, and just the human being, and considers that human being to have three capacities. So that's the key word and the key point of view, is that the human has a body capacity, a mind capacity, and a spirit capacity. And the spirit capacity is not spiritual. Spiritual is mind-driven, and it's interpretation of what something means. But spirit, in the use as Joe uses it, in my opinion, because of what he writes about when you do each exercise, you have to be totally concentrated on the purpose of the exercise. This total concentration on the purpose of the exercise requires the presence of the observer, or the presence of you listening to what's going on while it's happening. You have to be connected to the experience beyond just thinking about it. And I don't care where you want to place the listener, inside the brain or as a cosmic field or some other notion. What matters to the Pilates instructor is that you acknowledge the human being has the capacity to listen, to observe, and that without the presence of that concentration, of that attention, of that situational awareness, of the listener, right? Of the spirit that's going on in that moment, you're missing the mark for the complete coordination of all three of those. Because contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. And when that happens, you're in the moment. And so my words that extend Joe's definition, contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit, as a state of being, in the body, in the moment of the doing. Right? And there you are as Yoda, pointing your client into the cave of their sensation, asking them to listen to that sensation, to take more control. To me, it's a very heady experience. It's a very humbling experience. And it's a very thrilling experience. It's a very humbling experience to know that as a Pilates instructor, I stand in service up to my student or my group of students, to you, to help you find more control within yourself, within your body, mind, and spirit, right? All of you. That makes you up as a human. So, is that a full trip around the carousel? I don't know. But I remember I started with Joseph Pilates as a survivor, which lets you define his survival, or his method of survival training. It's choreography you perform as a human being to condition the body to optimally cope with its own biology and the physics that it finds itself in. So I feel that this whole focus has been on MMP. And I want to point out, I haven't said anything about core retention because that's another matter. It's biomechanical. Pilates is a method. The target is the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit as a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. And ideally, always, you take practicality toward the ideal and reaching that, performing Joe's choreography, because there isn't any better choreography. There isn't any new and improved choreography that's going to substantially change Joe's sequence, because it is fundamental in nature. The nature of the physics that we find ourselves in. Planes, rotations within those planes, torsions. So recognize, I mean, in terms of how do you align this with everything else that you know about Pilates? Well, it's just more of what you know about Pilates, right? But I would encourage you to at least consider what it means to say that MMP is transcendent. Because to me, if something is transcendent, it means it takes it to a new level. Copernicus's insights took our perception of ourselves in space to a new level. Bruce Lee took our assumptions about the martial arts to a new level. Einstein took our understanding of the physics that we live in to a new level. And in that regard, as Michael Miller, I'm just a guy, but I'm taking the Pilates world that exists out there, in my point of view, to a new level that is the ideal level based on the original work. It gives you a direct connection to Pilates and to the man. I was going to say to his method, but that's what I mean. That's not only intellectual, but sensational as well. Because in the pursuit of the ideal, you find the experience, and to the depth that you become familiar with the choreography, it does nothing but deepen and expand your experience in the moment, and the time, the effect, the effort, the result of the effort lingers on, right? So MMP is transcendent. MMP is transcendent. It's not a brag. It's just helping you clarify, how does MMP fit in with everything else? Well, it's just one view among everything else, and there's 10,000 views. But the more you know what this view is about, the more I think you will see that it is transcendent, because it goes somewhere where, to my understanding, no one else is willing to take Pilates, which is outside of a traditional, aristocratical, tribal point of view, to one that's just based on Joe's work. And all you need is this book. And it helps if someone explains it to you. So on a practical level, before I go, when you let go matters. And what I mean by that is your muscular engagement when you're on your mat and you're doing that first group of exercises that are on your back, at the end, if you're strong and you're finishing the exercise, usually on an elbow to knee, which I know is not original Joe in the book, but the double legs, the scissors and the double leg lower lift and the elbow to knee are adding more loading to what has already gone on in the leg work. And elbow to knee is finishing in rotation, which is so prevalent in all the rest of Joe's original work that it's like it makes sense to add rotation before one comes up and starts the pattern over again in the spine stretch. And so what I mean when I say when you let go matters, when you're doing elbow to knee and you've gone through all the other exercises to get to that point, it's a build-up to make a major transition from supine to sitting. And so to let go and go on your back and just lay on your back before you sit up and start the spine stretch is to miss the opportunity to press the flow. And why do we want to press the flow? We already said that today, right? Because you want to find the fusion. The fusion of what three things? Body, mind, and spirit. And what is spirit? Spirit is the observer, right? The listener to the sensation. The total concentration on performing the exercise, the purpose of the exercise. So when you build up elbow to knee or to whatever point you build up your engagement, let that buildup of engagement take you up into sitting and flowing seamlessly into your spine stretch. And more particularly yet, on the reformer at an intermediate level, I come out of short spine and do coordination. And at the end of my coordination, the temptation is to fall back and lay down and release out of that, rather than use that engagement to sit up and continue on. If it were advanced, you'd be spinning around and doing rowings. In intermediate, you're coming up to adjust springs in the foot bar for stomach massage. But the point being is that when you let go matters. So be aware of when the body is building up its control by how the degree that it's engaged in order to make some expansion away from center and control that. Like the two examples that I gave you. Okay? All right, so remember the carousel for yourself and for everyone that you teach. And the sooner that the carousel can go around and you can make somebody familiar, you can give some. See, a great session can be 3 lessons taught in an hour, 3 exercises in order, that you repeat those 3 in order 3 times during the hour. Because on the 3rd time you're going through the sequence of the 3 exercises, there will be an aha, because their familiarity will come from having done it twice already. Right? So you need familiarity to press the flow, and the only way you get familiarity is through repetition of pattern. Well, repetition, and then you amplify it by repeating the pattern. Okay? So, life can't live forever. Read between the lines. See behind the curtain. Don't nudge the curtain. Add 2 and 2. Go back and look at my old work on my blog from hermit.com, What's New, or on YouTube, Michael Miller Pilates, earlier recordings, because much of the clarity of what I think I'm saying today is based on what might be more clearly expressed in earlier attempts. You never know. Develop for yourself a comparison and read between the lines and see behind the curtain. You know, add 2 and 2 for yourself, right? And use MMP to empower your ability to survive as a Pilates instructor. Geist.